The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort McKenzie as Corporal Kira Thornhill stepped off the transport bus, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The base sprawled before her like a small city, buildings arranged in precise geometric patterns that spoke of decades of military tradition. She had arrived quietly, without fanfare, just another transfer in the endless rotation of personnel that kept the Army moving. The administration building stood 3 stories tall, red brick and white trim, flags snapping in the desert wind above its entrance. Kira walked through the double doors and found herself in a lobby that smelled of floor wax and old coffee. A specialist behind the desk barely looked up as she approached, sliding her paperwork across the counter with practiced efficiency. "Welcome to Fort McKenzie," the specialist said, his tone suggesting he had delivered the same greeting 1,000 times before. "You will need to report to housing for your barracks assignment. Then check in with your unit commander by 0800 tomorrow." Kira nodded, signed the necessary forms, and took her building assignments. The specialist glanced at her uniform, his eyes pausing for just a moment on the sniper badge above her ribbons, but he said nothing. She gathered her papers and headed back into the fading daylight. The walk to the armory took her past the main parade ground, where a company of soldiers practiced drill movements under the sharp commands of their sergeants. Everything here moved with ceremonial precision, she noticed. This was a training base, a place where tradition and protocol mattered more than improvisation. She had spent the last 3 years in very different places, where survival mattered more than spit shine, where decisions were measured in seconds rather than accordance with regulation. Before we continue with Kira's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe there is a military base near you, or perhaps you have served yourself and know what it feels like to arrive somewhere new, carrying more history than anyone around you can see. The armory sat at the edge of the main complex, a low concrete building with small windows and heavy security doors. Kira needed to sign out her assigned weapon and confirm her ammunition allotment. She pushed through the entrance and found herself in a space that felt more familiar than anything else on base. Rifles lined the walls in neat rows. The smell of gun oil and metal filled the air, and behind the counter stood a man who looked like he had been born in an armory. Master Sergeant Felix Rourke had the weathered face of someone who had seen actual combat, not just stateside training rotations. His eyes were sharp and assessing as Kira approached the counter. He took her paperwork without comment, began processing her request, then stopped. His gaze had found the badge on her chest. "Sniper qualified," he said quietly. It was not a question. "Yes, Sergeant," Kira replied. Rourke studied her for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been recognition or respect or both. "Where did you transfer from, Corporal?" "Forward deployed, classified operations unit," she said simply. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He returned to her paperwork, filled out the necessary forms, then retrieved her assigned rifle from the vault. As he handed it across the counter, he leaned forward slightly. "Word of advice," he said, keeping his voice low. "General Blackwood runs this base like it is his personal parade ground. He is big on ceremony, big on appearances. Likes everything by the book." "Understood, Sergeant," Kira said. Rourke nodded slowly, but his eyes held a warning she could not quite decipher. "Just keep your head down for a while. Let people get used to you." She thanked him, secured her weapon, and headed to her assigned barracks. The sun had set fully now, and the base lights created pools of illumination across the walkways. Soldiers moved between buildings, heading to evening chow or returning from duty shifts. No one paid her much attention, which suited her fine. Her barracks room was small but adequate, shared with 3 other female soldiers who were currently at dinner. Kira unpacked with efficient movements, storing her gear in the footlocker, hanging her uniforms with precise spacing. When everything was arranged, she sat on her bunk and looked at the sniper badge she had removed from her uniform for cleaning. 89 confirmed kills across 4 theaters of operation. 3 Bronze Stars, one of them earned when she was barely 20 years old and pinned down with her spotter for 18 hours in a building that was slowly collapsing around them. A silver star for action under fire that she rarely thought about, because thinking about it meant remembering the faces of the soldiers she had saved and the ones she had not been fast enough to save. She pinned the badge back onto her uniform, aligned it perfectly with her ribbons, and headed to dinner. The dining facility buzzed with conversation, hundreds of soldiers eating and talking and laughing. Kira moved through the line, collected her meal, and found an empty seat near the back. As she ate, she observed the social dynamics of the base, the way junior enlisted deferred to NCOs, the way officers sat in their own section, the careful hierarchy that governed every interaction. Tomorrow there would be a surprise inspection, according to the announcement board near the entrance. General Blackwood himself would be conducting it. Kira finished her meal, returned her tray, and walked back to her barracks through the cool night air, unaware that tomorrow everything would change. Morning formation began at 0600 sharp, and the entire base turned out in dress uniforms. Kira stood in her assigned position within the ranks, her uniform pressed to perfection, boots reflecting the early light that crept over the eastern mountains. Around her, hundreds of soldiers stood at attention, arranged in perfect lines that stretched across the parade ground like precisely drawn geometric patterns. Brigadier General Warren Blackwood arrived in a staff car that gleamed as brilliantly as his polished stars. He emerged with theatrical precision, his uniform immaculate, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of peacetime command. He was a man who had built his career on regulations and ceremony, on making sure every button was aligned and every salute was delivered with exact angles. Combat was something that happened to other people in distant places. His wars were fought on parade grounds and in formation drills. The general began his inspection at the far end of the first rank, moving with deliberate slowness, examining each soldier with exaggerated attention to detail. He would pause, lean forward, check the alignment of ribbons, ensure that name tags were positioned at the exact regulation height. Behind him walked Captain Damon Halstead, young and eager, carrying a clipboard and making notes whenever the general pointed out a deficiency. Kira watched Blackwood's progress through her peripheral vision, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead as regulations demanded. The general was 40 soldiers away, then 30, then 20. She could hear his voice now, the sharp commentary he delivered to each soldier, sometimes approving, more often critical. When he finally reached her position, Blackwood stopped completely. His eyes traveled from her boots upward, checking every detail of her uniform with the intensity of someone searching for a flaw. He found nothing wrong with her presentation because there was nothing wrong to find. Her uniform was perfect, but then his gaze settled on her chest, on the sniper badge positioned above her ribbons, and something shifted in his expression. "Corporal Thornhill," he said, his voice carrying across the silent formation. His tone suggested he had already found what he was looking for. "Yes, sir," Kira replied, her voice steady and clear. The general stepped closer, examining her badge with undisguised skepticism. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and when he spoke again, his words were carefully chosen but edged with doubt. "This is quite an impressive array of decorations for someone of your rank and apparent age, Corporal." "Thank you, sir," Kira said, offering nothing more. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. The sniper badge is a significant qualification. It requires extensive training, demonstrated proficiency, and verified performance in actual combat conditions. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "I am simply ensuring that all personnel under my command are wearing only those decorations they have properly earned and are authorized to display." "I am authorized, sir," Kira said. "All my qualifications are properly documented in my service record." The general tilted his head slightly, his expression suggesting polite disbelief masked as professional concern. "Of course, I'm certain everything is in order. However, given the sanctity of military decorations, particularly those related to combat specialties, I believe it is my responsibility to verify such matters thoroughly. We must protect the integrity of these honors." Around them, the formation remained silent, But Kira could feel the attention of hundreds of soldiers focused on this exchange. Some faces showed sympathy, others skepticism, still others simple curiosity. This was entertainment for them, a break in the monotony of inspection routine. Captain Halstead shifted uncomfortably behind the general, his pen hovering over his clipboard. From somewhere in the ranks behind her, Kira sensed Master Sergeant Rourke watching, his presence like a coiled spring waiting to release. "I will be reviewing your service jacket personally," Blackwood continued, his voice pitched perfectly to sound concerned rather than accusatory, though the underlying message was clear. "Just to ensure all documentation is complete and properly filed. You understand, of course. We must maintain standards." "Of course, sir," Kira replied. Her face remained completely neutral, showing neither offense nor concern. She had learned long ago that the best response to challenges was perfect military bearing and unwavering professionalism. Blackwood held her gaze for another moment, as if waiting for her to flinch or offer some defensive explanation. When she provided neither, he nodded curtly and moved on to the next soldier. But the damage was done. The whispers would start as soon as formation was dismissed. Questions would circulate through the barracks and dining facilities. Did she really earn that badge? Had she exaggerated her record? Was the general right to be suspicious? The inspection continued for another 30 minutes, but nothing else captured the general's attention the way Kira had. When he finally completed his review and released the formation, soldiers dispersed in clusters, their conversations animated. Kira walked alone toward her unit area, aware of the glances that followed her, the heads that turned as she passed. She had barely reached the company headquarters when Sergeant First Class Renata Voss caught up with her. Voss ran the base armory alongside Rourke, a stocky woman with kind eyes and hands that bore the scars of decades working with weapons and equipment. She had been standing with the NCO formation during inspection and had witnessed everything. "Do not let it get to you," Voss said quietly as they walked. "Blackwood does this. He finds someone to focus on, makes an example. Usually it is some private who forgot to shave properly." Kira nodded, but said nothing. Voss glanced at her sniper badge, then back to her face. "Rourke mentioned you transferred from a classified unit. That is unusual for someone coming to a training base." "My orders were not my decision, Sergeant," Kira replied. "They never are," Voss said with a slight smile. "But word of advice. Blackwood hates anything he cannot control or verify personally. Classified assignments make him paranoid. He's going to push this." "I have nothing to hide," Kira said simply. Voss studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you. But belief and proof are different things in the general's world. Just be ready." They reached the company headquarters and parted ways. Kira spent the rest of the morning processing administrative requirements, filling out forms, attending briefings that covered base policies and procedures she already knew by heart. Through it all, she felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. By afternoon, word had spread throughout the base. The new transfer with the sniper badge, the general's public questioning during inspection, the mystery surrounding her previous assignment. Every retelling added new details, most of them invented, until the story bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. Kira ignored it all, focusing on her assigned duties with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. But as the day ended and she returned to her barracks, she knew this was only the beginning. General Blackwood had made his suspicions public, and men like him never let go once they had fixed on a target. He would dig into her record, demand explanations, push until he found what he was looking for, or convince himself he had been right to question her in the first place. She lay on her bunk that evening, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how long it would take before everything unraveled. The summons came 3 days later, delivered by a private who could barely meet Kira's eyes. General Blackwood requested her presence in his office at 1400 hours. The word requested was a courtesy. When a general asked for your presence, it was an order wrapped in polite language. Kira arrived 10 minutes early, as protocol demanded, and waited in the outer office while the general's secretary typed at her computer with mechanical efficiency. The walls displayed photographs of Blackwood with various dignitaries, politicians, and senior officers, all taken at ceremonies and formal events. Not a single combat photo among them. This was a career built on appearances and connections, on being in the right place at the right time with the right uniform on. At precisely 1400, the secretary nodded toward the inner office door. Kira knocked twice, heard the command to enter, and stepped inside. The office was larger than necessary, decorated with flags and plaques and citations that celebrated Blackwood's administrative achievements. He sat behind a massive desk, and Captain Halstead stood to one side, holding a folder that Kira recognized as her service jacket. The captain looked uncomfortable, as though he wished to be anywhere else. Corporal Thornhill, reporting as ordered, sir, Kira said, standing at attention. Blackwood gestured to a chair positioned directly in front of his desk. Sit, Corporal. We have much to discuss. Kira sat with perfect posture, hands resting on her knees, eyes forward. The general opened a folder before him and made a show of reviewing its contents, though she suspected he had memorized every page already. I have been reviewing your service record, Blackwood began, his tone suggesting reasonable inquiry rather than accusation. And I must say, I find it quite remarkable. Multiple deployments, combat ribbons, and, of course, this sniper qualification. All very impressive for someone of your age and rank. He paused, waiting for her to respond. When she simply nodded acknowledgement, he continued. However, I noticed significant gaps in your documentation. Your previous unit designation is listed as classified. The specific operations you participated in are redacted. Even the locations of your deployments are obscured. This makes verification extremely difficult. The information is classified, sir, Kira said simply. Above my clearance level to discuss. Blackwood's expression tightened. I am a brigadier general, corporal. Very little is above my clearance level. With respect, sir, compartmented information is restricted based on need to know, not rank alone. I was briefed on specific operational security requirements when I transferred. The general leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the desk surface. So you are telling me that I, as the commanding officer of this base, cannot verify the qualifications and decorations of soldiers under my command. You can request verification through proper channels, sir, Kira replied. My chain of command from my previous unit can confirm my service record. And who exactly would that be? Blackwood asked, leaning forward again. That information is also classified, sir. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the general's bookshelf. Captain Halstead shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his discomfort growing more visible. Blackwood's face had taken on a reddish tint that suggested his patience was wearing thin. This is highly irregular, Corporal, he said, his voice harder now. In my 30 years of service, I have never encountered a situation where a soldier's basic service record was so thoroughly obscured. It raises questions, serious questions about authenticity and proper authorization. I understand your concern, Sir, Kira said, her tone remaining perfectly neutral. But I am not authorized to discuss classified operations or unit designations. My orders when transferring were explicit on this matter. Blackwood stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the parade ground. His hands clasped behind his back, he spoke without turning around. The sniper badge you wear requires documented proof of qualification. Live fire exercises, confirmed hits at specified ranges, performance evaluations from certified instructors. Where is this documentation? In my classified service jacket, sir, which would need to be accessed through intelligence channels. The general turned back to face her, his expression a mixture of frustration and suspicion. How convenient. Everything that would prove your claims is conveniently locked away where I cannot access it. You must see how this appears. I see that operational security protocols are frustrating for you, sir, Kira said carefully. But those protocols exist for valid reasons. I did not create them. Captain Halstead finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. Sir, if I may, we could contact Major Winslow in intelligence. He might have the clearances necessary to access more detailed records. Blackwood considered this, then nodded slowly. Yes. Contact Major Winslow immediately. Have him report here within the hour. He turned his attention back to Kira. In the meantime, Corporal, I want you to provide me with a detailed written account of how you earned that sniper badge. Every qualification shoot, every training course, every evaluation. If your service record cannot speak for you, then you will speak for yourself. Yes, sir, Kira said. And Corporal, Blackwood added as she stood to leave. Until this matter is resolved to my satisfaction, I am placing restrictions on your duties. You will not participate in any training exercises involving weapons. You will not instruct other soldiers in marksmanship, and you will not represent this base in any official capacity. Is that understood? Understood, sir, Kira replied, though something flickered behind her eyes for just a moment. Dismissed. Kira saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and left the office. As she walked down the corridor, she heard Halstead's voice through the partially open door, speaking quietly to the general. Sir, is this really necessary? Her transfer orders came through proper channels. Blackwood's response was sharp. Those orders could have been processed by anyone. Until I have proof, actual verifiable proof, I will not have someone wearing decorations they have not earned serving on my base. The integrity of military honors depends on vigilance. Outside, Kira stood in the late afternoon sun and took a slow breath. The restrictions Blackwood had imposed were humiliating, designed to publicly question her credibility. Every soldier on base would know within hours that the general had essentially stripped her of her primary duties pending investigation. The whispers would intensify, the doubts would multiply, and her reputation would erode with each passing day. Master Sergeant Rourke found her 20 minutes later in the company area, sitting alone at a picnic table and writing out the detailed account Blackwood had demanded. The sergeant sat down across from her without asking permission. He is making a mistake, Rourke said quietly. He is within his authority, Kira replied, not looking up from her writing. Authority and wisdom are not always the same thing. Rourke paused, then continued. I serve with men from JSOC, Corporal. I recognize the way they move, the way they watch rooms, the way they carry themselves. You have that same quality. Kira set down her pen and met his eyes. Even if that were true, Sergeant, it would not matter. The general wants proof, and proof requires clearances he does not have and cooperation from units that do not easily provide it. Then this is going to get worse before it gets better, Rourke said. Blackwood does not back down. Once he has convinced himself he is right, he will push until something breaks. I know, Kira said simply. Rourke studied her for a long moment, then stood. For what it is worth, some of us already know the truth. You're not alone in this. He walked away, leaving Kira to her writing as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. She filled page after page with details of training courses and qualification shoots, all carefully worded to reveal nothing classified while providing the documentation Blackwood demanded. But she knew it would not be enough. Men like the general did not ask for proof because they wanted to be convinced. They asked for proof because they wanted to see you fail to provide it. Major Cade Winslow arrived at General Blackwood's office within the hour, carrying a secure laptop and wearing the carefully neutral expression of an intelligence officer who had learned long ago that information was both weapon and shield. He was younger than most majors, promoted early for reasons that were themselves classified, and he moved through the world with the cautious precision of someone who knew too many secrets. Blackwood did not waste time on pleasantries. Major, I need you to access the complete service record for Corporal Kira Thornhill. I want verification of every decoration, every qualification, every operation she claims to have participated in. Winslow set his laptop on the conference table and opened it with deliberate slowness. Sir, I can attempt to access her records, but if she transferred from a classified unit, there may be compartmentalization issues. Compartmentalization, Blackwood repeated, his voice dripping with frustration. That seems to be the answer for everything regarding this corporal. Compartmentalization. Need to know. Classified. I am a commanding officer of this installation, Major. Surely that provides me with sufficient need to know. Winslow began typing, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The system requires specific justification codes for accessing compartmented records, sir. What is the nature of your inquiry? I am verifying the authenticity of decorations and qualifications, Blackwood said. That should be sufficient justification. The major continued typing, his face illuminated by the laptop screen. Multiple security prompts appeared, each requiring additional authentication. After several minutes, he leaned back and turned the screen so Blackwood could see it. This is what I can access with my current clearances, Winslow said. Standard service record shows Corporal Thornhill enlisted 4 years ago, completed basic training with honors, qualified expert with multiple weapon systems, deployed 3 times to undisclosed locations. The screen displayed basic information, dates and duty stations that revealed almost nothing of substance. What about her sniper qualification? Blackwood demanded. When did she earn it? Where is she trained? Who certified her? Winslow clicked through several screens, each one showing similar levels of redaction. The qualification is listed as verified and current, but the supporting documentation is above my access level. It references a training pipeline that I do not have clearance to view. This is absurd, Blackwood said, his voice rising. You are an intelligence officer. If you cannot access these records, who can? Someone with special access program clearances, Winslow replied calmly. Typically, that would be limited to specific operational commanders or individuals directly involved in those programs. Can you contact those commanders? Blackwood asked. Winslow closed the laptop carefully. Sir, with respect, requesting such access without operational justification could raise flags. These compartments exist for specific security reasons. Breaching them inappropriately could have significant consequences. The general stood and walked to his window again, a habit Winslow had noticed during previous meetings. This is precisely what concerns me, Major. A soldier arrives at my base wearing decorations I cannot verify, with a service record that is largely inaccessible, and when I attempt to conduct reasonable due diligence, I am told it is inappropriate to investigate further. I understand your frustration, sir, Winslow said, but the security protocols are not arbitrary. If Corporal Thornhill served in sensitive operations, revealing details about those operations could endanger ongoing missions or compromise sources and methods. Or, Blackwood turned back to face him, she could be a fraud who is hiding behind convenient claims of classification. Have you considered that possibility, Major? Winslow chose his words carefully. Sir, the Army does not typically issue transfer orders for fraudulent personnel through normal channels. Her presence here suggests that someone with appropriate authority verified her credentials and approved her assignment. Typically does not mean always, Blackwood said. Mistakes happen. Fraudulent records have been created before. I will not simply accept that everything is legitimate because questioning it is inconvenient. Captain Halstead, who had been present for the entire exchange, finally spoke. Sir, perhaps we could request a general verification from her previous chain of command. Not specific operational details, just confirmation that her decorations and qualifications are legitimate. Blackwood considered this, then nodded slowly. Yes. Draft that request immediately, Captain. Address it to whoever commanded her previous unit. Make it clear that I am seeking official verification, not operational details. Sir, Winslow said quietly, I should inform you that such requests sometimes take weeks to process. The unit's Corporal Thornhill likely served with operate on different timelines than conventional forces. Then we wait, Blackwood said firmly. In the meantime, my restrictions on her duties remain in effect. After Winslow and Halstead departed, Blackwood sat alone in his office, reviewing the limited information he had gathered. Everything about Kira Thornhill seemed designed to frustrate verification. Her service record was a maze of redactions and classifications. Her previous commanders were unnamed. Her operations were undisclosed. Either she was exactly what she appeared to be, a highly trained soldier with legitimate credentials, or she was extraordinarily skilled at deception. He picked up his phone and dialed the base sergeant major, a grizzled veteran named Preston who had served in actual combat before rotating to training command. When Preston answered, Blackwood got straight to the point. Sergeant Major, I need you to quietly ask around about Corporal Thornhill. Talk to your network. See if anyone knows anything about her previous service. Any rumors, any stories, anything that might help me understand who she really is. Preston was silent for a moment. Sir, with respect, if her service is classified, my network is not likely to know much. Those communities keep their secrets well. Try anyway, Blackwood said. Someone always knows something. Across the base, Kira sat in her barracks, aware that her world was narrowing. The restrictions had spread through the base gossip network with predictable speed. She was now the soldier who could not be trusted with weapons, who could not instruct others, who had apparently failed some crucial verification. The looks she received in the dining facility had changed from curious to suspicious. Conversations stopped when she approached. Even soldiers she outranked seemed uncertain how to interact with her. Private Jonah Merrick found her that evening, sitting alone on the steps outside the barracks. He was fresh from basic training, assigned to the base just 2 weeks earlier, and he carried the earnest confusion of someone trying to understand military politics for the first time. Corporal, he said hesitantly, can I ask you something? Go ahead, Private, Kira replied. Is it true you are under investigation? That the general thinks you are wearing a badge you did not earn. It is true that the general has questions about my service record, Kira said carefully. He is conducting appropriate verification. But you did earn it, right? Merrick asked. The badge. You are a real sniper. Kira looked at the young private, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. He had been scheduled to receive marksmanship instruction from her before Blackwood imposed the restrictions. Now he was caught between respecting her rank and doubting her credentials. I earned everything I wear, Private, she said quietly. But I understand why people have questions. Sometimes the truth is harder to prove than lies. Merrick nodded slowly, then stood. For what it is worth, Corporal Sergeant Voss says you're the real deal. She told us in the armory that we should pay attention to anything you teach us whenever you are clear to teach again. Thank you, Private, Kira said. After Merrick left, Kira remained on the steps, watching the sun set over Fort McKenzie. General Blackwood was thorough. She would give him that. He was systematically closing off every avenue she had to prove herself, creating a situation where her silence was interpreted as guilt and her inability to provide details was seen as evasion. It was a bureaucratic trap, perfectly legal and utterly effective. The only way out was for someone with appropriate clearances to break the classification barriers and reveal what she had actually done. But those revelations came with their own dangers. Some things were classified not just to protect operations, but to protect the people who had carried them out. Once certain details became public, even within military circles, there was no taking them back. She stood and walked inside, knowing that tomorrow would bring more whispers, more doubt, and more questions she could not answer. General Blackwood had made his investigation public, and now they were both committed to seeing it through to whatever end awaited them. The announcement came through official channels at 0700 on a Thursday morning. All base personnel were to assemble on the main parade ground at 1400 hours for a mandatory formation. No exceptions. The order was signed by General Blackwood himself, and its unusual timing, midweek and mid-afternoon, suggested something significant was about to occur. Word spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Soldiers speculated over breakfast, debated during morning duties, and grew increasingly nervous as the appointed hour approached. Some thought it was about upcoming deployments. Others suspected a surprise inspection or perhaps an announcement about base closures. But those who had been paying attention, those who had watched the general's fixation on a certain corporal over the past 2 weeks, had a different theory. Kira heard the whispers as she moved through her restricted duties. She was currently assigned to administrative tasks, filing paperwork and organizing supply records, work that kept her away from weapons and training areas. The other soldiers in the office had been polite but distant, uncertain how to interact with someone under the general scrutiny. When Sergeant Voss found her at 1100 hours, the armory chief's face was tight with concern. She pulled Kira into an empty conference room and closed the door. "This formation is about you," Voss said without preamble. "Blackwood has been telling his staff he is going to resolve the situation today. Publicly." Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach, but kept her expression neutral. "Did he say what he plans to do?" "No, but when a general calls a base-wide formation to resolve something, it is never good for the person at the center of it." Voss paused, studying Kira's face. "Whatever happens out there, remember that some of us know better. Rourke, myself, even Winslow. We have seen enough to recognize the real thing." "Thank you, Sergeant," Kira said quietly. The hours until formation crawled past with agonizing slowness. Kira returned to her barracks at 1300 to change in her dress uniform. The same uniform she had worn 2 weeks earlier when this had all begun. She pinned on her sniper badge with steady hands, aligned her ribbons with precise spacing, and checked her appearance in the mirror. Whatever was coming, she would face it with the same professionalism she brought to everything else. The walk to the parade ground felt longer than it should have. Other soldiers moved in groups, their conversations falling silent as she passed. She found her position in the formation and stood at ease, waiting. Around her, the entire base population assembled, hundreds of soldiers filling the vast open space in neat ranks and files. At precisely 1400 hours, General Blackwood's staff car rolled onto the parade ground. He emerged in full dress uniform, medals gleaming in the afternoon sun, and walked to a raised platform that had been erected at the front of the formation. Captain Halstead followed, carrying his ever-present clipboard, his face pale and worried. Behind them came Major Winslow and Sergeant Major Preston, both looking grim. The command to attention echoed across the parade ground, and hundreds of boots crashed together in unison. Blackwood climbed the steps to the platform and stood surveying the assembled soldiers with the bearing of a man about to deliver judgment. "Soldiers of Fort McKenzie," he began, his voice amplified by speakers positioned around the ground. "Today I stand before you to address a matter that goes to the very heart of military service. The integrity of our decorations, the honesty of our qualifications, and the trust we place in one another." He paused, letting his words sink in. Kira felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward her, though she kept her own gaze fixed straight ahead. "In our ranks," Blackwood continued, "we have soldiers who have earned the right to wear prestigious badges and ribbons through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The sniper badge, in particular, represents a level of skill and dedication that few achieve. It is not simply handed out. It must be earned through rigorous training, demonstrated proficiency, and verified performance in the most demanding circumstances." The general's voice grew harder, which is why I take very seriously any question about whether such decorations have been properly earned. When I encounter a soldier whose credentials cannot be easily verified, whose service record is obscured by classification, whose previous commanders cannot be contacted, I have a responsibility to investigate, not out of malice, but out of duty to those who have genuinely earned their honors. Kira stood perfectly still, her face showing nothing, but inside she felt the calculated cruelty of what Blackwood was doing. He was not simply questioning her credentials privately. He was making an example of her before the entire base, using her as a symbol to demonstrate his own vigilance and authority. 2 weeks ago, Blackwood said, "I questioned the qualifications of one of our soldiers. I requested documentation, verification, proof that the decorations she wears were legitimately earned. The response I received was inadequate. Classified records, compartmented information, need to know restrictions. At every turn, my reasonable requests for verification were blocked by bureaucratic obstacles." He turned and gestured toward the formation, though he did not specify Kira by name. Everyone knew anyway. When a soldier cannot or will not provide clear evidence of their qualifications, when their service record is so thoroughly obscured that even intelligence officers cannot access it, we must ask ourselves difficult questions. Are these legitimate security measures, or are they convenient excuses? Master Sergeant Rourke, standing in the NCO section, had his jaw clenched so tight that muscles stood out along his neck. Sergeant Voss stared straight ahead, her hands fisted at her sides. Even Captain Halstead looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Today, Blackwood announced, "I'm calling for full transparency. I am calling for complete verification. And I am calling forward the soldier in question to address this formation directly." The pause that followed seemed to stretch forever. Corporal Kira Thornhill, Blackwood's voice rang out across the parade ground. Front and center, Kira stepped forward, her movements crisp and precise. She marched through the formation as hundreds of soldiers watched, her boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. When she reached the platform, she stopped at its base, saluted the general, and stood at attention. Blackwood looked down at her from his elevated position, the physical height difference emphasizing the power dynamic he had created. "Corporal Thornhill," he said, his voice now conversational but still amplified for all to hear. "I have spent 2 weeks attempting to verify your credentials. I have been unable to access your complete service record. I have been unable to contact your previous commanders. I have been unable to confirm the operations you claim to have participated in." He paused, letting the silence build. "So I'm giving you this opportunity, here and now, before your fellow soldiers. Tell us how you earned that sniper badge. Provide this formation with clear, verifiable evidence that you have the right to wear it. Not classified details, not compartmented information, but simple facts that we can all understand and confirm." Kira stood silent for a moment, knowing that whatever she said next would define how this ended. The general had backed her into a corner, created a situation where silence looked like admission of guilt, and any answer she gave could be dismissed as unprovable claims. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and steady, "my qualifications are documented in my official service record. That record is classified because the operations I participated in remain sensitive. I am not authorized to discuss those operations publicly, regardless of the circumstances." Blackwood's expression hardened. "So even now, even given this direct opportunity to clear your name, you hide behind classification." "I am following the security protocols I swore to uphold," Sir Kira replied. "The same oath we all took." The general leaned forward slightly. "Convenient oaths when they protect you from scrutiny." He straightened and addressed the formation again. "This is the problem we face. When soldiers can claim anything, earn anything, and then refuse to provide evidence by invoking classification, the entire system becomes vulnerable to abuse." "Sir," a voice called from the formation. Major Winslow had stepped forward slightly. "Sir, if I may speak." Blackwood frowned but nodded. "Major." Winslow walked toward the platform with measured steps. "Sir, I've been working on accessing Corporal Thornhill's records through appropriate channels. With your permission, I believe I can provide the verification you're seeking. But it will require accessing classified systems in a secure environment, not in an open formation." The general studied Winslow for a long moment. The major's intervention had shifted the dynamics slightly, introduced an element Blackwood had not planned for. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well, Major. You will access those records immediately and report your findings to me within the hour." He turned back to Kira. "Corporal, you will remain at attention here until we have verification one way or another. This matter ends today." Kira stood at attention at the base of the platform while Major Winslow disappeared into the headquarters building. The entire formation remained in place, hundreds of soldiers frozen in position, waiting. The afternoon sun beat down on the parade ground, and sweat began to trace lines down faces and backs. No one spoke. The only sounds were the wind moving across the open space and the distant rumble of vehicles on the perimeter road. General Blackwood remained on the platform, arms crossed, projecting the confidence of a man who knew he was right. He had orchestrated this moment carefully, created a public spectacle that would either vindicate his suspicions or demonstrate his vigilance in protecting military honors. Either outcome would serve his purposes. He would either expose a fraud or prove that he took proper verification seriously enough to challenge even his own personnel. Captain Halstead stood to one side, his clipboard forgotten now, watching Kira with an expression that had shifted from uncertainty to something approaching concern. He had participated in this process, helped the general build his case, but now that it was playing out in front of the entire base, the cruelty of it was becoming harder to ignore. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The formation grew restless, soldiers shifting weight from foot to foot, trying to ease the strain of standing at attention for so long. Master Sergeant Rourke maintained perfect posture, but his eyes never left Kira, as if willing her to hold on just a little longer. Private Merrick, standing in the junior enlisted ranks, felt his legs beginning to tremble from the sustained position. He watched Corporal Thornhill standing alone before the general, isolated and exposed, and felt a mixture of admiration and shame. Admiration for her composure under impossible pressure, shame that he had ever doubted her. Sergeant Voss, positioned with the NCO section, did mental calculations about how long it would take Winslow to navigate the security protocols necessary to access truly compartmented records. The fact that it was taking this long suggested he was accessing something significant, something buried deep in classified systems that required multiple authentication levels. 25 minutes. 30. The sun moved lower in the sky, shadows lengthening across the parade ground. Still no sign of Major Winslow. Blackwood checked his watch repeatedly, his confidence beginning to show hairline cracks. He had expected this to be resolved quickly, had anticipated either confirmation of his suspicions or some fumbling explanation that would validate his concerns. At 37 minutes, the headquarters building doors opened and Major Winslow emerged. He carried a red folder with diagonal classification markings, the kind reserved for information that could damage national security if improperly disclosed. His face was carefully neutral, but something in his bearing had changed. He walked across the parade ground with deliberate steps, climbed onto the platform, and stood before General Blackwood. "Sir," Winslow said quietly, "I have accessed Corporal Thornhill's complete service record. The information I am about to share is classified secret. I will provide only what is necessary for verification purposes without compromising operational security." Blackwood nodded, gesturing for him to continue. The major opened the folder, and even from her position below the platform, Kira could see pages dense with text, much of it still redacted, but with enough visible content to tell a story. "Corporal Thornhill enlisted 4 years ago," Winslow began, his voice now amplified so the entire formation could hear. "After completing basic training and advanced individual training, she was selected for specialized marksmanship training based on exceptional performance at the rifle range. She scored in the 99th percentile on all shooting evaluations." He turned a page. Following completion of specialized training, she was assigned to a forward-deployed unit conducting operations in classified locations. During her first deployment, she participated in 47 combat missions over a 9-month period. The formation had gone completely still now. Every soldier was listening, the earlier restlessness forgotten. Her sniper qualification was earned during this first deployment, Winslow continued. She completed all required coursework, passed all evaluation shoots, and demonstrated proficiency in multiple weapon systems, including the M110, M24, and Barrett M82. Her instructors rated her as the top graduate in her class. Blackwood's expression had shifted slightly, though he maintained his composure. "Continue, Major." Winslow turned another page. During her second deployment, Corporal Thornhill was assigned to a specialized task force conducting direct action missions. She served as primary sniper for a 12-person team operating in high-threat environments. During this deployment, she engaged enemy combatants on 31 separate occasions. The major paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made every word significant. Her longest confirmed engagement was at 2,473 meters. Target was an enemy combatant preparing to detonate an explosive device that would have killed 6 coalition soldiers. Corporal Thornhill made the shot in variable wind conditions, at an elevated angle, using ammunition that was not optimally matched to her weapon. The shot was witnessed and verified by her spotter and team leader. A ripple of reaction moved through the formation, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. Even soldiers who knew nothing about long-range shooting understood that what Winslow was describing required extraordinary skill. Blackwood's face had lost some of its color. That is, he paused, searching for words. That is quite remarkable. If true, it is documented and verified, Sir, Winslow said firmly. I have the after-action reports, witness statements, and official citations, all properly authenticated and filed through appropriate channels. The general straightened. What about her decorations? The combat ribbons. Are those verified as well? Yes, sir. Winslow flipped through more pages. 3 Bronze Stars, one with Valor Device awarded after engagement, where she provided sustained covering fire that enabled the evacuation of wounded personnel under heavy enemy contact. She maintained her position for 4 hours while under direct fire, expending over 200 rounds with an 87% hit rate at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. He turned another page. 2nd Bronze Star with Valor Device for an operation where her team was ambushed and her team leader was critically wounded. She assumed command, directed defensive fire, called in air support, and personally engaged 12 enemy combatants while coordinating the extraction of her team. All team members survived. Captain Halstead had stopped taking notes entirely. He simply stood, listening, his expression transforming from discomfort to something approaching horror as he realized the magnitude of what he had helped the general do to this soldier. 3rd Bronze Star awarded for sustained combat excellence over a 6-month period during her 3rd deployment. Winslow continued. During this deployment, she participated in 63 combat operations and achieved a verified engagement rate that placed her in the top 2% of all snipers serving in theater. The major looked up from the folder. Sir, there is more. Much more. But most of it remains too sensitive to discuss in an open forum. What I can tell you is that Corporal Thornhill's record is not only legitimate, it is exceptional. She has been recommended for promotion twice and declined both times, choosing to remain in her current role. Why would she decline promotion? Blackwood asked, his voice now lacking its earlier certainty. Because promotion would have moved her out of direct combat operations, Winslow said. According to her evaluations, she repeatedly stated that she wanted to continue serving where she could be most effective. The silence that followed was profound. Hundreds of soldiers stood motionless, processing what they had just heard. The corporal they had watched being publicly questioned, the soldier whose credentials had been systematically doubted, was not just qualified. She was extraordinary. Blackwood stood on the platform, still holding his position of authority, but looking diminished somehow. The folder in Winslow's hands contained truths that had just destroyed the general's narrative, exposed his assumptions, and revealed his accusations for what they were. Kira remained at attention, face impassive, waiting for whatever came next. But something had shifted in the atmosphere around her. The doubt that had surrounded her for 2 weeks was evaporating, replaced by a different kind of attention. Not suspicion now, but recognition. Not skepticism, but respect earned through the revelation of undeniable truth. General Blackwood stood on the platform, the weight of Major Winslow's revelations settling over him like a physical burden. He had called this formation to expose what he believed was fraud, to demonstrate his vigilance in protecting military honors. Instead, he had publicly humiliated a soldier whose record was not just legitimate, but extraordinary. The eyes of hundreds of soldiers watched him now, waiting to see how he would respond. Major, he said, his voice struggling to maintain its earlier authority, this is certainly impressive information. However, I must point out that much of what you describe occurred in classified operations that cannot be independently verified by most personnel present. Winslow's expression hardened slightly. Sir, the verification exists through proper channels. The citations were approved by flag officers. The engagements were witnessed and documented according to military protocols. This is not unverified claims. This is official record. Yes, but Blackwood began, then stopped. He was grasping now, searching for some way to salvage his position. The fact remains that for 2 weeks, Corporal Thornhill could not provide this information herself. She stonewalled legitimate inquiries. She followed security protocols, Winslow said, his tone respectful but firm. Protocols that exist for valid reasons, sir. She was not authorized to discuss classified operations, and she did not. That is proper conduct, not evasion. Blackwood's jaw tightened. He turned to look at Kira, still standing at attention below him. The corporal has been less than forthcoming throughout this process. Surely you can understand my concerns, given the lack of transparency. Captain Halstead stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Sir, he said quietly, may I address the formation? Blackwood hesitated, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, but unable to see a path forward that did not make things worse. He nodded curtly. Halstead moved to the front of the platform and took a breath before speaking. 2 weeks ago, I stood beside General Blackwood when he first questioned Corporal Thornhill's credentials. I participated in the investigation that followed. I helped draft the restrictions placed on her duties. And I did all of this because I believed we were conducting appropriate verification of decorations and qualifications. He paused, looking out at the assembled soldiers. I was wrong. Not wrong to want verification. That is always appropriate. But wrong in how we approached it. Wrong in assuming that classification was evasion rather than proper security protocol. Wrong in creating a public spectacle around a soldier who was simply following the rules she swore to uphold. The captain turned to look at Kira. Corporal Thornhill has conducted herself with exceptional professionalism throughout this process. She has been questioned publicly, restricted from her duties, and subjected to suspicion from the entire base. And through it all, she maintained her composure, followed protocol, and never once complained or demanded special treatment. Halstead faced the formation again. What Major Winslow has revealed today should make us all reconsider our assumptions. How many of us doubted her? How many whispered that she could not possibly have earned her decorations? How many looked at her and saw someone who did not fit our preconceptions of what a combat veteran should look like? The words hung in the air, challenging every soldier present to examine their own biases and assumptions. Private Merrick felt heat rise in his face, remembering his own doubts. Sergeant Voss allowed herself a slight nod of approval, recognizing that Halstead was finally seeing clearly. Master Sergeant Rourke remained motionless, but satisfaction flickered in his eyes. He had known from the beginning, had recognized in Kira the same qualities he had seen in other operators from the Special Operations community. Now everyone else was catching up to what he had understood all along. Sir, Halstead said, turning back to Blackwood, I believe Corporal Thornhill deserves a public apology. From both of us. Blackwood's face flushed red. The general was trapped in a corner of his own making, forced to choose between admitting error publicly or appearing obstinate in the face of overwhelming evidence. The formation waited, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. Finally, Blackwood spoke, his voice strained. Corporal Thornhill, he said, I acknowledge that your record has been properly verified. The investigation I conducted was, he paused, searching for words that would not be complete capitulation, within my authority as base commander, but I recognize that the manner in which it was conducted may have been unnecessarily public. It was an apology without quite being an apology, an admission of error wrapped in defensive justifications. Kira stood at attention, saying nothing, accepting whatever the general offered with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout. Major Winslow cleared his throat. Sir, there is one more item from her record that I believe should be shared with the formation. It pertains directly to why Corporal Thornhill transferred to Fort McKenzie. Blackwood looked at Winslow warily. Go on, Major. Winslow opened the folder again. After her third deployment, Corporal Thornhill was offered a direct commission to lieutenant. She declined. She was offered a position as an instructor at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. She declined. She was finally convinced to accept an assignment here at Fort McKenzie specifically to develop and improve our marksmanship training programs. She was sent here because senior leadership believes she has knowledge and skills that need to be passed on to the next generation of soldiers. He closed the folder. The restrictions General Blackwood placed on her duties specifically prohibited her from doing the job she was sent here to accomplish. For 2 weeks, one of the Army's most accomplished snipers has been filing paperwork because we questioned whether she had earned a right to be here. The implication was clear and devastating. Not only had Blackwood been wrong to question Kira's credentials, he had actively prevented her from fulfilling the mission that senior leadership had assigned her. The general's face had gone from red to pale, the full magnitude of his error finally becoming apparent. Captain Halstead seized the moment. "Sir, I recommend that all restrictions on Corporal Thornhill be lifted immediately. Furthermore, I recommend she be given a formal role in overseeing all sniper and advanced marksmanship training on this base." Blackwood stood silent for a long moment. The formation waited. Finally, the general nodded, the movement stiff and reluctant. "So ordered. All restrictions are lifted. Captain Halstead, work with Major Winslow to develop appropriate training assignments for Corporal Thornhill." He turned to look at Kira one final time. "Corporal, you are dismissed. Return to your duties." Kira saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and began walking back to her position in the formation. As she moved through the ranks, something remarkable happened. Soldiers began to come to attention as she passed, a spontaneous show of respect that rippled through the assembly. It was not required by regulation, not ordered by any commander, but it happened nonetheless. When she reached her position, Master Sergeant Rourke caught her eye and gave the slightest nod. Sergeant Voss was openly smiling. Private Merrick stood straighter, as if proximity to her required better military bearing. Even soldiers who had whispered doubts about her now looked at her with newfound respect. General Blackwood dismissed the formation shortly after, his voice lacking the commanding presence it had held at the beginning. As soldiers dispersed, they did not discuss the general's investigation or his verification process. They discussed the corporal who had stood alone before the entire base and let the truth speak for itself. They discussed the shots at impossible ranges, the Bronze Stars earned under fire, the missions in places they would never know about, conducted by a soldier who looked like she could disappear into any crowd, but had chosen instead to step forward when her country needed her. Kira walked back to her barracks through the late afternoon light, aware of the glances that followed her, but no longer suspicious or doubtful. The whispers had changed. The isolation had ended. She had not asked for vindication or demanded apology, had simply stood firm while the truth caught up to the accusations. And in doing so, she had earned something more valuable than decorations or badges. She had earned genuine respect from those who now understood what she had sacrificed and accomplished. The transformation on Fort McKenzie did not happen overnight, but began the moment formation was dismissed. Soldiers who had spent 2 weeks avoiding Kira now sought her out, some to apologize, others to express respect they had been too uncertain to show before. She accepted both with quiet grace, never mentioning the whispers or the doubt, simply moving forward as if the past 2 weeks had been an unfortunate administrative delay rather than a systematic attempt to discredit her. The morning after the formation, Kira reported to Captain Halstead's office as ordered. The young officer looked like he had not slept well, dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of a conscience wrestling with recent actions. He stood when she entered and gestured to a chair. "Corporal, I want to start by offering you a genuine apology," he said once they were both seated. "Not the careful political statement the general gave yesterday, but a real acknowledgement that I was wrong. I helped create a situation that was unfair to you, that damaged your reputation, and that prevented you from doing the work you were sent here to accomplish." Kira met his eyes. "I understand, sir. You were following orders and conducting what you believed was appropriate verification. That is generous of you," Halstead said, "but it does not excuse the fact that I should have questioned the general's approach earlier. I should have recognized that classification existed for reasons beyond evasion." He paused, then continued. "I learned something these past 2 weeks about my own assumptions and biases. Uncomfortable lessons, but necessary ones. He opened a folder on his desk. Major Winslow, and I have been working on your training assignment. The base currently has 6 qualified sniper instructors, but based on what we learned yesterday, your experience exceeds all of theirs combined. We would like you to serve as senior marksmanship advisor, overseeing all advanced shooting programs and developing new training protocols. That is a significant responsibility, sir, Kira said carefully. It is, and honestly, it should come with a promotion to sergeant at minimum. I have already started the paperwork for an accelerated promotion board. Halstead leaned forward slightly. But I also wanted to ask what you need from us to make this work. Resources, equipment, support staff. What would allow you to build the kind of program you envision? For the first time since arriving at Fort McKenzie, Kira allowed herself to consider possibilities beyond simply surviving each day. She thought about the young soldiers she had observed at the range before the restrictions, their enthusiasm hampered by outdated training methods and insufficient individual attention. She thought about Private Merrick and soldiers like him, eager to learn but lacking access to the kind of instruction that could transform raw potential into refined skill. I would need access to the long-range facilities, she said. Real distance shooting, not just the standard qualification ranges. I would need authorization to modify training schedules so soldiers have time to develop fundamentals properly rather than rushing through qualification shoots. And I would need the authority to fail soldiers who are not ready, even if it delays their progression. Halstead nodded, making notes. Done, and done. What else? I would need experienced spotters and assistant instructors who understand that teaching marksmanship is about more than putting rounds on target. It is about building the mental discipline and emotional control that separate adequate shooters from exceptional ones. The captain looked up from his notes. Would you be willing to train those assistant instructors yourself? Yes, sir, Kira replied, if given the authority and time to do it properly. Over the following days, Kira began building the framework for what would become the most comprehensive marksmanship program Fort McKenzie had ever seen. She started by evaluating the existing instructors, not to judge them harshly, but to understand their strengths and identify areas where additional training would help. Most of them were experienced shooters who had been teaching the same way for years, effective within their limitations, but lacking exposure to the advanced technique Kira had learned in specialized units. Master Sergeant Rourke became her unofficial advisor, his years in special operations providing context and institutional knowledge that helped navigate the base bureaucracy. He introduced her to the NCOs who ran the ranges, the supply sergeants who controlled ammunition allocation, and the company commanders whose soldiers would be filling her classes. You are building something important here, Rourke told her one afternoon as they walked the long-range facility together. Most soldiers never get training like what you're planning. They qualify with their weapons, and that is the end of it. But the ones who come through your program, they will have skills that could save their lives downrange. That is the goal, Sergeant Kira said, to give them every advantage I can. Sergeant Voss helped secure equipment, pulling strings with the supply system to get upgraded optics, better ammunition, and additional weapons that would allow students to train on multiple platforms. She seemed to take personal satisfaction in supporting Kira's program, as if each piece of equipment acquired was a small victory against the doubt that had surrounded her arrival. Private Merrick was among the first to sign up for the advanced marksmanship course Kira designed. He approached her nervously one morning, asking if he was qualified enough to attempt it. The course is designed for soldiers who want to be better, Kira told him. If you're willing to work hard and accept honest feedback, you're qualified enough. The young private's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. I will work harder than anyone, Corporal, I promise. She believed him. There is something in his eagerness that reminded her of herself years ago, newly enlisted and hungry to prove that she belonged in a world that did not expect much from someone who looked like her. But not everyone on base had embraced the new reality with equal grace. General Blackwood had grown increasingly distant after the formation, delegating more decisions to his staff and spending less time conducting the public inspections he had once relished. The few times Kira encountered him on base, he acknowledged her with the minimum courtesy required by rank and regulation, but nothing more. His humiliation had not transformed into respect, merely into avoidance. Captain Halstead mentioned this during one of their planning sessions. "The general has submitted a request for transfer," he said quietly. "It was approved. He will be leaving Fort McKenzie in 6 weeks." Kira nodded, unsurprised. "Sometimes the only way forward is somewhere else, sir." "Perhaps," Halstead agreed. "But his departure will leave a command vacuum that someone will need to fill. The base needs leadership that understands the value of what you are building here, that will support rather than undermine it." "That leadership will come," Kira said with quiet confidence. "It always does eventually." As the days progressed, Kira's program began to take shape. She established a rigorous selection process for students, not to exclude, but to ensure they understood the commitment required. She developed a curriculum that progressed from fundamental marksmanship principles through advanced techniques that most conventional training never covered. She created evaluation standards that were demanding but fair, designed to push students beyond what they thought themselves capable of achieving. The first class began with 20 soldiers, ranging from private to staff sergeant, all volunteers who had heard about the program and wanted to participate. Kira stood before them on the first morning, dressed in her standard uniform with the sniper badge that had caused so much controversy, now simply one part of who she was. "This course will challenge you," she told them. "You will discover limits you did not know you had, and you will learn to push past them. Some of you will fail initially and need to return for another attempt. That is not weakness. That is the honest assessment of where you are and where you need to be." She paused, looking at each face. "But if you commit to this training, if you bring discipline and effort and willingness to learn, you will leave here as better soldiers. Not because I make you better, but because you choose to become better." Private Merrick sat in the front row, hanging on every word. Around him, other soldiers leaned forward with similar attention. They had all heard the stories now, the details of Kira's record that had emerged in fragments after the formation. They knew about the impossible shots and the bronze stars earned under fire. But more importantly, they knew about the 2 weeks she had endured with dignity and professionalism while her reputation was systematically attacked. That combination of proven skill and proven character made them ready to learn in ways that simple credentials never could have achieved. They were not here because regulations required it or because a general ordered it. They were here because they had watched someone demonstrate what it meant to be a soldier who lived up to standards, even when doing so came at tremendous personal cost. Kira began the first lesson, her voice clear and confident, teaching skills she had earned through years of demanding training and combat operations. As she spoke, explaining the fundamentals of proper breathing and trigger control, she felt something settle into place. This was why she had been sent to Fort McKenzie. Not to prove herself to generals or satisfy bureaucratic verification requirements, but to pass on knowledge that could save lives when these soldiers eventually deployed to places where precision and discipline made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 3 weeks into the advanced marksmanship course, Kira's students were beginning to understand the gap between adequate shooting and true precision. The morning sessions focused on fundamentals, the afternoon sessions on practical application, and the evening sessions on the mental discipline required to perform under pressure. Private Merrick had proven himself among the most dedicated, arriving early and staying late, absorbing every lesson with the intensity of someone who understood he was receiving instruction few soldiers ever accessed. But it was during the 4th week that everything nearly fell apart. The incident began on a Wednesday afternoon at the 1,000-meter range, where Kira was demonstrating wind reading techniques to her advanced students. A delegation arrived from division headquarters, 3 officers conducting an unannounced inspection tour of training facilities across multiple bases. Among them was Colonel Raymond Pritchard, a career infantry officer known for his traditional views on military training and his skepticism about specialized programs that diverted resources from conventional readiness. The colonel watched for several minutes as Kira instructed her students on reading mirage and calculating wind drift. When she paused for questions, he stepped forward with the bearing of someone accustomed to immediate deference. "Corporal," he said, his tone carrying across the range, "I have been observing your instruction. This appears quite different from standard marksmanship qualification training." "Yes, sir," Kira replied, recognizing the implicit criticism. "This is advanced precision shooting, not basic qualification." Pritchard walked closer, studying the equipment laid out on the firing line. Expensive rifles, premium optics, match-grade ammunition. He picked up a box of rounds and examined the label. "This ammunition costs approximately $4 per round. Standard ball ammunition costs less than 50 cents. Can you justify this expense?" "This course teaches skills that save lives in combat," Sir Kira said evenly. "The ammunition investment is insignificant compared to the value of soldiers who can engage targets effectively at extended ranges." The colonel set down the ammunition box with deliberate care. "And you are qualified to make these determinations. You are what? A corporal. For years in service." The students on the firing line had gone completely still, sensing confrontation. Master Sergeant Rourke, who had been assisting with the training, stepped forward slightly, but Kira caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. "I am qualified as a sniper instructor, sir, and I have combat experience that informs my training methodology," Kira replied, keeping her voice professional. "Combat experience?" Pritchard repeated, his skepticism plain. "I have been reviewing training programs across this division, and I keep finding these specialized courses that pull soldiers away from their primary duties for weeks at a time. Meanwhile, basic infantry skills deteriorate because everyone wants to be a special operator. This course does not create special operators," Sir Kira said. "It creates infantry soldiers with enhanced marksmanship capabilities that directly support their primary mission." The colonel turned to face her fully now, and his next words carried the weight of someone who had already decided the outcome of this conversation. "I am recommending that division consolidate all advanced marksmanship training into a single location with standardized curriculum. Individual-based programs like this one represent inefficient use of resources and create training inconsistencies across the division." The implication was clear. Kira's program would be shut down, folded into some larger bureaucratic structure where the specialized attention and advanced techniques would be diluted or eliminated entirely. The students she had been training would return to standard qualification courses that taught them enough to pass tests, but not enough to excel in actual combat conditions. "Sir," Captain Halstead's voice came from behind the group. The captain had arrived with the inspection party, but had been hanging back, observing. "With respect, I believe you may want to review the results this program has achieved before making that recommendation." Pritchard turned to face Halstead with barely concealed annoyance. "Captain, I have reviewed plenty of metrics. Every specialized program claims exceptional results. The question is whether those results justify the resource expenditure. Perhaps a demonstration would be more persuasive than metrics," Halstead suggested, his tone respectful but firm. "Corporal Thornhill, would you be willing to demonstrate the level of precision your training produces?" Kira hesitated for only a moment. "Yes, sir." Halstead turned back to the colonel. "Sir, if you have 30 minutes, I believe we can provide you with context that will inform your recommendation." Pritchard checked his watch with exaggerated patience. 30 minutes, Captain. Then we need to continue our inspection schedule." What followed was the most important shooting demonstration Kira had ever conducted. She moved to the firing line with Private Merrick serving as her spotter, a role he had been training for throughout the course. The target was set at 1,500 meters, a steel plate barely visible in the distance. Wind was variable, gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature was dropping as evening approached, affecting ballistic calculations. Kira settled into position behind her rifle, a customized M24 that she had personally zeroed and knew intimately. Merrick lay beside her with the spotting scope, calling wind and making range adjustments based on the training he had received. The inspection party stood behind them, Pritchard with arms crossed, the other officers watching with professional interest. "Wind is 9 miles per hour from 10 o'clock, Merrick said quietly, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Range 1,500 meters. Temperature 62 degrees. Mirage indicates left to right drift approximately 2.3 mils. Kira made minute adjustments to her scope, controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow as she entered the focus state where everything outside the shot ceased to matter. She pressed the trigger with steady pressure, and the rifle recoiled smoothly into her shoulder. 1,500 meters away, the steel plate rang with the unmistakable sound of impact. Dead center. Pritchard said nothing, but his expression shifted slightly. Halstead spoke into the silence. "Would you like to see that repeated, sir, or perhaps at a greater distance?" The colonel's jaw tightened. "One successful shot proves little, Captain. Anyone can get lucky." Kira remained in position. "Sir," she said without looking back, "I can continue if you would like to see consistency rather than luck." Pritchard glanced at his watch again, then nodded curtly. 5 more shots. Same target. Kira fired 5 more times over the next 3 minutes. Each shot required reading the wind, making calculations, adjusting for the slight temperature change as evening settled in. Merrick called each shot, his confidence growing with every impact. 5 rounds, 5 hits, the pattern tight enough that an observer at the target would have struggled to distinguish individual impacts. The inspection party stood silent. Even Pritchard could not dismiss what he had just witnessed as luck or coincidence. This was trained precision, the kind of shooting that required thousands of hours of practice and instruction from someone who truly understood the craft. "Now," Captain Halstead said quietly, "imagine every soldier in an infantry platoon capable of engaging targets effectively at ranges where the enemy believes they are safe. Imagine the tactical advantage of having designated marksmen who can provide precision fire support without requiring dedicated sniper teams. That is what this program produces." Pritchard walked forward to examine the rifle, the ammunition, the data cards that showed wind calculations and ballistic tables. He looked at Private Merrick, who had been spotting with the competence of someone who had received exceptional instruction. "How long has this private been training?" the colonel asked. "For weeks, sir," Kira replied. "For weeks, and he can spot at this level," Pritchard said, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to look at Kira with new attention. "Your service record. Captain Halstead mentioned you have combat experience. What exactly does that entail?" It was Captain Halstead who answered. "Sir, Corporal Thornhill has 3 Bronze Stars, 2 with Valor Device, and a classified service record that includes multiple combat deployments with specialized units. Her longest confirmed engagement is 2,473 meters. She was sent to Fort McKenzie specifically to develop advanced training programs because senior leadership recognized that her skills and experience needed to be passed on to other soldiers." The colonel absorbed this information, his earlier skepticism tempered by what he had just witnessed. He looked back at the target downrange, then at the students standing along the firing line, all of them watching this exchange with undisguised tension. Finally, Pritchard spoke. "I will revise my recommendation. This program will continue pending a formal evaluation in 6 months. At that time, we will assess whether it should be expanded to other bases or if consolidation remains the better option." He turned to Kira. "Corporal, I suggest you document your training methodology thoroughly. If this program expands, we will need curricula that other instructors can follow." "Yes, sir," Kira replied. The inspection party departed shortly after, leaving behind a range full of soldiers who had just witnessed their instructor prove herself yet again. This time not against doubt or accusation, but against institutional inertia and resource scarcity. Private Merrick approached Kira as she was cleaning her rifle, his face showing a mixture of relief and admiration. "That was incredible, Corporal," he said. "The way you shot, the way you handled the colonel's skepticism. You made it look effortless." "It was not effortless, Private," Kira said, running a cleaning rod through the barrel. "It was training and practice and experience. The same things you are building here." "Do you think the program will really continue?" Merrick asked. "Or will they shut it down in 6 months regardless of results?" Kira looked at him directly. "That depends on us. On whether we can prove that what we are teaching makes a real difference. On whether the soldiers who complete this course perform better when it matters." She paused, So we keep training. We keep building skills. And we trust that competence will speak for itself. She had learned that lesson the hard way over the past 2 months. Credentials could be questioned. Records could be obscured. But actual demonstrated skill, witnessed by those making decisions, was harder to dismiss. The shot she had made today will be discussed throughout the division. The demonstration would be described and redescribed until it took on mythic qualities. And through those discussions, the value of her program would be established in ways that no written report could match. As the sun set over Fort McKenzie, Kira finished cleaning her weapon and secure it properly. Tomorrow, she would continue teaching, continue building the program, continue preparing soldiers for the challenges they would face downrange. Because that had always been the mission, regardless of the obstacles placed in her path. The 6-month evaluation arrived with the inevitability of changing seasons. Colonel Pritchard returned to Fort McKenzie, accompanied by a full assessment team from Division Headquarters. Their mission to determine whether Kira's advanced marksmanship program justified continued resource allocation or should be consolidated into a standardized division-wide curriculum. The stakes were clear to everyone involved. This was not simply about one training program at one base. This was about whether the Army would embrace specialized skill development or retreat to one-size-fits-all instruction. General Blackwood had departed 3 months earlier, his transfer finalized with minimal ceremony. In his place, Colonel Margaret Ashford had assumed command of Fort McKenzie, a veteran officer whose combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq gave her a perspective her predecessor had lacked. She had spent her first month observing Kira's program before calling her in for a private conversation. "I have read your complete service record," Ashford had told her during that meeting, the classified portions included. "I know what you accomplished downrange, and I know what you're trying to build here. You have my full support, but you need to understand that support from a base commander only goes so far. Division makes the final call." Now Division was here, and the next 3 days would determine everything. The assessment team had developed a comprehensive evaluation protocol that included reviewing training records, interviewing students and instructors, observing live instruction, and conducting performance assessments. But the centerpiece of the evaluation was a competitive shooting event that would pit Kira's students against soldiers from other bases who had received conventional marksmanship training. The competition was scheduled for the final day of the assessment, giving the evaluation team time to observe Kira's methods firsthand. They sat through classroom instruction on ballistics and wind reading. They watched her work on and on with struggling students, breaking down complex skills into manageable components. They observed the way she demanded excellence while maintaining respect, pushed students beyond their comfort zones while ensuring they never felt diminished by failure. Major Winslow, who had become an unofficial advisor to the program, pulled Kira aside the evening before the competition. "The team is impressed with your instruction," he said quietly, but Pritchard remained skeptical about whether the results justify the cost. "Tomorrow matters more than everything else combined. If your students perform significantly better than conventionally trained soldiers, he will have to recommend program continuation. If the difference is marginal, he has the justification to consolidate." Kira nodded, feeling the weight of 6 months of work compressed into a single day's performance. She had done everything possible to prepare her students, but competitions introduced variables that training could not fully account for. Pressure, nerves, the desire to prove themselves, all could affect performance in ways that regular training sessions did not. The competition began at 0800 on a Friday morning. Clear skies and moderate temperatures creating near-ideal conditions. 20 shooters participated, 10 from Kira's advanced course and 10 from other bases, all carefully matched by rank and experience level. The course of fire included engagements at multiple distances, from 300 meters to 1,200 meters, with time limits that required both speed and precision. Private Merrick was among Kira's students competing, paired with another soldier she had trained as a spotter. The young private had transformed over 6 months from an enthusiastic beginner into a genuinely skilled marksman, his natural talent refined through disciplined instruction. But this morning his hands trembled slightly as he prepared his equipment. the pressure of the evaluation visible in his tense shoulders and quick breathing. Kira approached him during the preparation period, her voice calm and steady. "Private, you have made every shot on this course 100 times in training. Today is no different except there are people watching. Ignore them. Focus on your fundamentals and trust your training." "What if I miss, Corporal?" Merrick asked quietly. "What if I let you down?" "Then you miss and we learn from it," Kira replied. "But you will not let me down by giving your best effort. The only way you let me down is by allowing fear to prevent you from showing what you have learned." The competition proceeded through its stages with military precision. At 300 meters, both groups performed well, the distance requiring solid fundamentals, but not extraordinary skill. At 500 meters, differences began to emerge. Kira's students showed superior wind reading and faster target acquisition. At 800 meters, the gap widened noticeably. Conventionally trained soldiers struggled with the increased difficulty, while Kira's students adapted smoothly, their training having prepared them for exactly these conditions. But it was at 1,200 meters that the true separation occurred. This distance exceeded standard qualification requirements, pushing into the realm where precision shooting became an art informed by science. The conventionally trained soldiers fired with determination but limited success, their hit rate dropping to below 30%. Kira's students maintained 65% hit rates, some like Private Merrick achieving even higher numbers through combinations of skill and disciplined execution. Colonel Pritchard watched from the observation area, his expression unreadable as he made notes on his evaluation form. The numbers were undeniable. The performance gap was substantial. But Kira knew that numbers alone might not be sufficient. Military bureaucracies could find ways to dismiss data that challenged established practices. The final stage of the competition was individual precision shooting at maximum range. Each competitor would fire 3 shots at a target placed at 1,500 meters, scored on accuracy and consistency. This stage would separate good shooters from exceptional ones, would demonstrate whether Kira's training produced soldiers capable of performance that exceeded conventional expectations. Private Merrick fired during the 3rd rotation, his breathing controlled, his movements economical and precise. The first shot struck center mass. The second shot grouped within inches of the first. The third shot completed a pattern tight enough to cover with a standard index card. 3 hits. Perfect execution. The culmination of 6 months of dedicated training under an instructor who had refused to accept anything less than his best effort. But it was the competitor who followed Merrick who provided the moment that would define the evaluation. Staff Sergeant Elena Cortez, a conventional marksmanship instructor from another base, and one of the evaluation team members, had been skeptical throughout the assessment. She had 20 years of experience teaching shooting and believed her methods were sound. She had privately expressed doubt that one corporal's specialized training could produce significantly better results than proven conventional techniques. She fired 3 times at 1,500 meters. 1 hit, 2 misses. Respectable performance for someone without specialized training, but the contrast with Merrick's perfection was stark and undeniable. Cortez lowered her rifle slowly, staring downrange at the target that had defeated 2 of her 3 attempts, while a private with 6 months of advanced training had made it look routine. Colonel Pritchard approached Cortez as she cleared her weapon. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "what is your assessment of what you just witnessed?" Cortez was silent for a long moment, professional pride warring with honest evaluation. Finally, she spoke. "Sir, I have been teaching marksmanship for 15 years. I'm good at what I do, and my students consistently qualify. But what I just saw, what that private just demonstrated, exceeds anything I could have taught him using conventional methods." She turned to look at Kira, who stood with her students, offering quiet feedback and encouragement. "Whatever Corporal Thornhill is doing, it works. Not marginally better, not slightly improved. Substantially, measurably, demonstrably superior. If I had soldiers who could shoot like that, we would dominate any engagement at extended ranges." Pritchard nodded slowly, writing notes that would become part of his formal recommendation. The competition concluded shortly after, final scores calculated and recorded. Kira's students had outperformed conventionally trained competitors by an average of 42% across all distances. At extreme ranges, the performance gap exceeded 60%. The data was comprehensive, the results irrefutable. That evening, the assessment team convened for final deliberations. Kira was not present for those discussions, but Captain Halstead attended as base representative and later shared what had occurred. Pritchard had opened by acknowledging that the performance data exceeded his expectations. He had reviewed the resource costs and concluded that while the program was more expensive than conventional training, the capability enhancement justified the investment. He had interviewed students who universally praised the instruction they received. And finally, he had witnessed Staff Sergeant Cortez, a respected instructor with decades of experience, publicly acknowledge that conventional methods could not produce equivalent results. The recommendation was unanimous. The program would continue. Moreover, Division would fund expansion to 3 additional bases over the next year, with Kira responsible for training the instructors who would implement similar programs. Her methodology would be documented and standardized, creating a replicable model that could transform marksmanship training across the entire division. When Captain Halstead delivered the news to Kira the following morning, she accepted it with characteristic quietness. No celebration, no triumphant declarations, simply acknowledgement that the work would continue and expand. But those who knew her well, Rourke and Voss and Halstead himself, recognized the satisfaction in her eyes. She had not built this program for recognition or advancement. She had built it because soldiers deserved the best training possible, because skills saved lives downrange, because excellence mattered more than convenience. Private Merrick found her later that day at the range, where she was already preparing for the next training cycle. He stood at attention until she told him to relax, then spoke with the earnestness that had characterized him from the beginning. "Corporal, I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for the training, though that has been incredible, but for showing me what it means to be a soldier. You could have given up when General Blackwood questioned you. You could have been bitter about the restrictions and the doubt. But you just kept being professional, kept doing the work, kept proving yourself through actions instead of words." He paused, then continued. "That is the real lesson I learned here. Not just how to shoot at long range, but how to conduct yourself with integrity when things are difficult. How to let your competence speak for itself. How to respect the standards even when others question whether you meet them." Kira looked at the young private who had arrived 6 months earlier as an uncertain beginner and now stood before her as a confident, capable soldier. "That is what I hoped you would learn, Private," she said quietly. "The shooting skills are important, but the character you develop while earning those skills matters more. You will forget specific techniques and need to relearn them. But the discipline and professionalism you build become part of who you are." She turned back to the range, where targets waited at various distances, ready for tomorrow's students. The work continued, as it always would, building one skilled soldier at a time. The months following the evaluation brought changes that rippled far beyond Fort McKenzie. Division headquarters authorized funding for program expansion, and Kira found herself traveling to other bases, training instructors who would replicate her methods in their own commands. She moved through this new role with the same quiet competence that had defined everything else, never seeking attention, but consistently delivering results that exceeded expectations. But it was a cold morning in late autumn when the past returned in unexpected form. Kira was conducting instructor certification at the range when a staff car arrived carrying a passenger she had not seen in nearly 18 months. Colonel Thomas Reeves emerged, wearing the uniform of Joint Special Operations Command and the bearing of someone accustomed to operating in shadows. He had been her commander during her second deployment, the officer who had written one of the Bronze Star citations that Major Winslow had read aloud during that formation so many months ago. Reeves approached with the easy confidence of someone who had seen Kira perform under the worst possible conditions and never doubted her capabilities. He waited until she finished her current instruction block, then greeted her with genuine warmth. "Corporal Thornhill," he said, "though I understand congratulations are in order. Sergeant Thornhill now, correct. Yes, sir, Kira replied. The promotion had come through 6 weeks earlier, recognition of her expanded responsibilities and the program's success. As of last month. Well-deserved, Reeves said. I have been following your work here through channels, building quite a reputation as an instructor. They tell me your students are outperforming everyone else by significant margins. The students do the work, sir, Kira said. I just provide framework and guidance. Reeves smiled slightly, recognizing the deflection as characteristic of her personality. Always modest. Some things never change. He gestured toward his vehicle. Do you have a few minutes? There is something I would like to discuss. They walked to a quiet area away from the active ranges, and Reeves explained the purpose of his visit. The special operations community had noticed the results Kira was producing. They wanted her back, not for combat operations this time, but to develop advanced marksmanship programs for Tier 1 units. It would mean promotion to Staff Sergeant, assignment to a specialized training command, and the opportunity to work with the most elite soldiers in the military. You built something remarkable here, Reeves said, but imagine what you could build with unlimited resources, the best equipment available, and students who are already among the most skilled operators in the world. You could define marksmanship training standards for the entire special operations community. It was an offer most soldiers would accept without hesitation. Career advancement, prestigious assignment, return to the community where she had earned her reputation. But Kira stood silent, looking out across the ranges where her current students were practicing, where Private Merrick and dozens like him were developing skills that would serve them throughout their careers. Sir, she said carefully, I appreciate the offer and I am honored that the community thinks I could contribute at that level. But I believe I am where I need to be right now. These soldiers, the ones training on these ranges, they need instruction just as much as special operations personnel. Maybe more, because they often deploy without the same level of support and resources. Reeves nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. He had known Kira long enough to recognize that her decisions were never about personal advancement. They were about where she could make the most difference, where her skills could save the most lives. I understand, he said. The offer remains open if you change your mind. But I will tell you something else. What you're doing here matters just as much as anything happening in the special operations community. Maybe more, because you're raising the baseline competence level for the entire force. That has strategic value that goes beyond any single mission or operation. He paused, then continued. When I wrote that Bronze Star citation, I described your actions during a specific engagement. But what I could not include in official documentation was how you changed that entire team. You set a standard through your performance that made everyone around you better. You are doing the same thing here, just on a larger scale. Thank you, sir, Kira said quietly. After Reeves departed, Kira returned to her students, who had continued training during her absence. Master Sergeant Rourke approached as she was setting up for the afternoon session, his weathered face showing approval. That was your old commander, he observed. JSOC doesn't send colonels for social visits. They made you an offer. They did, Kira confirmed. And you turn it down, Rourke said, statement rather than question. This is where I am supposed to be, Sergeant, Kira replied simply. Rourke nodded, respect evident in his expression. Most people chase promotions and prestigious assignments. You chase purpose. That is rare. The afternoon training session proceeded as normal. Students working through drills that had become familiar through repetition, but still required intense focus and discipline. Private Merrick, now preparing for his own deployment, demonstrated techniques to newer students with the patience and clarity that came from having been taught well himself. He had absorbed not just Kira's methods, but her approach, understanding that teaching was about building understanding rather than simply transferring information. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Colonel Ashford arrived at the range with a visitor. Brigadier General Marcus Holland commanded the division's training operations, and his presence suggested something significant was developing. Ashford made introductions with military formality, then stepped back to let Holland speak. Sergeant Thornhill, the general began, I have been reviewing the results of your program across multiple bases. The data is compelling. Your methodologies are producing measurable improvements in soldier readiness and combat effectiveness. Based on this success, I am authorizing expansion of the program to all installations within the division. Furthermore, I am creating a new position, Division Marksmanship Training Coordinator. The position carries the rank of Sergeant First Class and authority over all precision shooting programs division-wide. He paused, looking directly at Kira. I am offering you that position. You would have staff, budget, and the authority to implement your training standards across the entire division. It would be the most comprehensive transformation of marksmanship training this division has seen in decades. Kira absorbed the information, recognizing the magnitude of what was being offered. This was not just program expansion, but institutional change, the kind of transformation that could affect thousands of soldiers over years and potentially shape how the entire Army approached precision shooting instruction. Sir, she said after a moment, I would be honored to accept that position. But I have one condition. Holland raised an eyebrow. Go on, Sergeant. The program only works if instructors are properly trained and if we maintain standards that push students beyond minimum qualification, Kira said. If I take this position, I need authority to evaluate and certify all instructors personally, and I need commitment that we will not dilute training standard for the sake of throughput or convenience. The general smiled slightly. Sergeant, those are not conditions. Those are exactly why I'm offering you this position. You have demonstrated that high standards produce better soldiers. I want you to export those standards across the division and ensure they are maintained properly. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Yes, sir, Kira said, shaking his hand firmly. After the general and colonel departed, the range fell quiet as training concluded for the day. Students secured equipment and prepared weapons for storage, their movements efficient from months of practice. Sergeant Voss arrived to help with final accountability, her presence as reliable as ever. Heard you got offered a big promotion, Voss said as they worked. Division Coordinator. That is impressive, Thornhill. It is an opportunity to do the work at larger scale, Kira replied, checking serial numbers against inventory sheets. It is recognition that you were right and Blackwood was wrong, Voss corrected gently. That matters too. You stood your ground when he tried to break you, and now you are defining training standards for the entire division. That is justice. Kira paused in her work, considering this perspective. Maybe it is, she said finally, but I prefer to think of it as just the mission continuing. Different scope, same purpose. Training soldiers so they are ready when it matters. Voss smiled. Same modest Thornhill who showed up here a year ago. Some things even promotion cannot change. As darkness settled over Fort McKenzie, Kira completed her final checks and secured the range for the night. Tomorrow she would begin the transition to her new role, start building the infrastructure necessary to coordinate training across multiple bases, begin the process of evaluating and certifying instructors who would carry forward the standards she had established. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. A year ago, she had arrived at this base as just another transfer, her credentials questioned, her abilities doubted, her purpose unclear. She had endured systematic attempts to discredit her, had stood alone while her reputation was attacked, had maintained professionalism when bitterness would have been understandable. And through it all, she had simply done the work, followed protocol, maintained standards, let competence speak for itself. Now she stood as the architect of training transformation across an entire division. Her methods validated, her approach vindicated, her purpose expanded to scales she could not have imagined when she first stepped off that transport bus into the late afternoon sun. The sniper badge on her chest, once the center of so much controversy, was now simply one element of a uniform that represented something larger. It represented the principle that merit mattered more than assumptions, that quiet competence ultimately prevailed over loud doubt, and that soldiers who held themselves to the highest standards earned respect that no amount of politics or bureaucracy could diminish. 6 months into her new role as Division Marksmanship Training Coordinator, Sergeant First Class Kira Thornhill stood on a platform overlooking the main parade ground at Fort McKenzie. The occasion was a formal graduation ceremony for the division's first cohort of certified advanced marksmanship instructors. 32 soldiers who had completed the rigorous training program she had designed and would now return to their respective bases to implement her methodologies across the entire division. The morning sun illuminated rows of soldiers in dress uniforms, their families seated in bleachers along the perimeter, flags snapping in the crisp spring breeze. General Holland would deliver the keynote address, but Kira had been asked to present the certifications personally to pass the literal and symbolic responsibility for maintaining standards from her hands to theirs. As she waited for the ceremony to begin, Kira reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 14 months earlier, she had been a corporal whose credentials were questioned, whose abilities were doubted, whose very right to wear her decorations had been challenged before hundreds of witnesses. Now she stood as the architect of training transformation, her name synonymous with excellence in marksmanship instruction, her method studied and replicated across installations throughout the division. The transformation had not been easy or inevitable. It had required unwavering commitment to standards when compromise would have been simpler. It had demanded professionalism in the face of public humiliation. It had necessitated letting results speak louder than words, allowing competence to answer doubt more effectively than any defense could have achieved. Master Sergeant Rourke stood in the front row of instructors being certified, his weathered face showing pride that needed no verbal expression. Beside him stood Staff Sergeant Elena Cortez, the conventional instructor who had competed against Private Merrick during the evaluation and subsequently requested transfer to Fort McKenzie specifically to learn Kira's methods. She had proven herself an exceptional student and would now return to her original base as lead marksmanship instructor, carrying forward the standards she had once doubted. Captain Halstead, recently promoted to major, served as ceremony coordinator. His journey from uncomfortable participant in General Blackwood's investigation to passionate advocate for advanced training had been its own transformation. He had learned difficult lessons about assumptions and bias, about the difference between appropriate verification and systematic undermining, and he carried those lessons forward in his current role, overseeing all division training programs. The ceremony began with General Holland taking the podium, his voice carrying across the assembly with natural authority. Today we recognize soldiers who have completed the most demanding instructor certification program this division offers, he said. These men and women have demonstrated not just shooting proficiency, but the ability to teach complex skills, to maintain high standards, and to develop other soldiers into marksmen who will excel when combat demands precision under pressure. He paused, looking toward Kira. This program exists because one soldier refused to accept that good enough was sufficient. Sergeant First Class Thornhill arrived at Fort McKenzie with exceptional skills and a mission to transform how we train soldiers in advanced marksmanship. She faced significant obstacles, including questions about her own credentials that were later proven not just legitimate but extraordinary. Through that difficult period, she maintained professionalism, trusted the process, and let her work speak for itself. The general's words carried weight throughout the assembly, acknowledging without dwelling on the challenges Kira had faced. What she built here has already changed this division, Holland continued. Soldiers who complete advanced marksmanship training are deploying with capabilities that exceed anything we have produced before. They are engaging targets at ranges that give us tactical advantages in combat. They are saving lives through precision that prevents collateral damage. And they are returning from deployments with confidence that comes from knowing they were trained by the absolute best. He gestured toward the graduating instructors. These soldiers will now carry that mission forward to every corner of our division. They will train the next generation of marksmen using standards that Sergeant Thornhill established and methods she has proven effective through measurable results. This is how institutional excellence spreads, through dedicated professionals who commit themselves to being better and helping others improve. When General Holland concluded his remarks, Kira stepped forward to present certifications. Each instructor approached individually, received their certificate and qualification badge, and shook her hand. Some exchanged brief words of gratitude. Others simply nodded with understanding that needed no elaboration. Master Sergeant Rourke was among the last, and when Kira handed him his certification, he spoke quietly. "You built something that will outlast all of us," he said. "Soldiers 10 years from now will benefit from standards you established. That is legacy." "Thank you, Sergeant," Kira replied. "But the legacy belongs to all of us who commit to excellence." After the ceremony concluded and families dispersed, Kira found Private Merrick waiting near the platform. He wore the uniform of a specialist now, having been promoted after his deployment, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven himself in actual combat. He had returned from Afghanistan 3 weeks earlier and had specifically requested to attend this ceremony before rotating to his next assignment. "Corporal," he began, then corrected himself with a slight smile. "Sergeant First Class, I wanted to thank you before I leave for my new unit." "You already thanked me, Specialist," Kira said. "Multiple times." "I know, but now I can thank you from the other side," Merrick replied. "I deployed with the skills you taught me. I used them in actual combat. I made shots that protected my team, eliminated threats before they could harm friendly forces, and came home knowing I was as prepared as anyone could have made me." He paused, emotion evident in his voice. "There was a moment downrange when I had to make a 1,200-meter shot in high wind with a spotter I had only worked with for 2 days. Everything was wrong, the conditions were terrible, and the target was preparing to fire on a patrol that had no idea they were being tracked. I remembered everything you taught me about reading wind, about controlling breathing, about trusting the fundamentals when nothing else is certain." Merrick met her eyes directly. "I made the shot. The patrol never knew they were in danger. They came home to their families because you taught me not just how to shoot, but how to think like a sniper. That is what I wanted to thank you for. Not the technical skills, though those mattered, but the mindset, the discipline, the understanding that precision shooting is as much mental as physical." Kira felt the weight of his words, recognizing them as the truest validation any instructor could receive. "That is exactly why I do this work, Specialist," she said quietly. "So soldiers like you can come home. So the skills we teach in training translate to success in combat. So no one dies because we accepted good enough instead of demanding excellence." If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, your favorite character, or if you have ever witnessed someone prove their worth against impossible odds. Share your thoughts about what resonated most with you, or tell us if you have known someone who showed this kind of quiet strength and dedication. After Merrick departed, Kira remained on the parade ground as it emptied. Sergeant Voss approached with her characteristic directness, carrying 2 cups of coffee and offering one to Kira. "Big day," Voss observed. "Your program is now official division policy. Your methods are being taught at 8 bases. You have gone from question corporal to the person who defines marksmanship standards for 15,000 soldiers." "It is surreal when you put it that way," Kira admitted. "You earned every bit of it," Voss said firmly. "Not through politics or connections or being in the right place at the right time. You earned it by being so undeniably competent that even people who wanted to doubt you could not dismiss the evidence." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the base go about its daily business. Soldiers moved between buildings, vehicles traversed perimeter roads, helicopters circled overhead on training flights. All the ordinary activity of a military installation, made possible by thousands of individual soldiers doing their jobs with varying degrees of skill and dedication. "What General Blackwood never understood," Voss said quietly, "is that questioning your credentials was not wrong in principle. Verification matters. Standards matter. But the way he did it, the public humiliation, the assumption of guilt, that revealed more about his character than yours." He was convinced he was right, Kira said without bitterness. "Sometimes people commit fully to a narrative and cannot see past it, even when evidence contradicts their assumptions. And sometimes people prove them so thoroughly wrong that the entire base watches their assumptions crumble in real time." Voss replied with satisfaction. That formation where Winslow read your record aloud. That was justice in its purest form. Not revenge, just truth finally getting its moment. As the afternoon progressed, Kira returned to her office to begin planning the next phase of program expansion. Division headquarters had approved additional funding for specialized equipment and authorized her to develop advanced instructor courses for soldiers who wanted to pursue even higher levels of expertise. The mission was growing, the responsibility expanding, but the fundamental purpose remained unchanged. Train soldiers to the highest possible standard so they could succeed when missions demanded perfection and failure meant lives lost. Her desk held a photograph taken during the recent graduation ceremony, showing the 32 newly certified instructors standing together. Among them were soldiers of every rank from corporal to master sergeant, from every background and demographic, united by commitment to excellence in their craft. This was the real transformation that had occurred over the past 14 months. Not just one questioned soldier proving her worth, but an entire culture shifting to embrace the principle that high standards produced better outcomes than convenient compromises. The sniper badge on her uniform had been the catalyst for everything that followed, the visible symbol that had attracted doubt and eventually demanded vindication. But the badge itself mattered less than what it represented. The willingness to hold oneself accountable to the highest standards. The discipline to maintain excellence, even when doing so came at personal cost. The understanding that some things were worth fighting for not through confrontation, but through unwavering commitment to doing the work correctly. Kira had not changed Fort McKenzie through dramatic gestures or forceful personality. She had changed it by showing up every day and doing excellent work. By teaching with patience and demanding results with fairness. By letting competence answer questions more effectively than words ever could. And by trusting that truth, given enough time and space, would always prove stronger than doubt. As the sun set over Fort McKenzie, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Sergeant First Class Kira Thornhill prepared for another day of training that would begin tomorrow morning. The mission continued, as it always would, building one skilled soldier at a time, establishing standards that would outlast any individual career, creating legacy through the quiet accumulation of excellence that needed no announcement, because results spoke loudly enough on their own.